Marcus Chen had always been good with his hands. 23 years of fixing everything from coffee makers to starship engines had taught him that every machine had a heartbeat, a rhythm you could feel through your fingertips. Right now, the massive derelict ship around him felt like it was dying. The evacuation alarm had stopped screaming 3 hours ago. The silence was worse. Marcus crawled through the maintenance shaft, his toolkit clanking against the metal walls. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly red glow. The Terran salvage crew had found this ancient vessel drifting in the Kepler 442 system, a massive thing the size of a small city. Nobody knew what species built it. The xenoarchaeologists were calling it a discovery that would rewrite history. Now Marcus was calling it his tomb. The evacuation had happened fast, too fast. A cascade failure in the ship's unknown power systems triggered every safety protocol the Terran engineers had installed. Within minutes, the salvage vessel Prometheus had detached and jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind only essential systems and anyone unlucky enough to be deep in the ship's bowels when the alarm sounded. Marcus had been trying to repair a gravity generator in Section 7 when the lights went out. By the time he reached the docking bay, he found empty space where his ride home should have been. Emergency protocol dictated they couldn't risk the entire expedition for one person. He understood the logic. He just wished understanding made him feel less abandoned. His wrist communicator crackled with static. No signal could penetrate the ship's strange metal hull. For all he knew, the Prometheus was already reporting him dead to the Terran Colonial Authority. His sister would get a flag and a medal. His niece would ask why Uncle Marcus never came home. The maintenance shaft ended at a junction. Marcus consulted his scanner, trying to map his position against the crude schematics they'd managed to create. The ship was enormous, with architecture that hurt to look at directly. Corridors curved in impossible directions, rooms connected to themselves. The xenoarchaeology team had theorized that whoever built this ship perceived space differently than humans. Marcus just wanted to find the emergency beacon. He dropped through a floor hatch into what looked like a cargo bay. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, supported by pillars that resembled twisted DNA helixes. Containers the size of shipping pods sat in orderly rows, their surfaces covered in symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. A sound echoed through the bay. Not mechanical, organic. Marcus froze, his hand moving instinctively to the plasma torch on his belt. The initial surveys had found no signs of life aboard the derelict. The ship had been empty for millennia, its builders long gone. But something was moving in the darkness between the containers. The sound came again, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the deck plates, almost like purring. If a creature the size of a shuttle bus could purr. Marcus activated his helmet's night vision and nearly jumped out of his skin. Golden eyes the size of dinner plates stared back at him from the shadows. Then more eyes appeared, and more. They emerged slowly from their hiding places among the cargo containers. Dragons. That was the only word that fit, even though dragons were supposed to be mythical. They moved with liquid grace despite their size, each one easily 12 feet long from snout to tail. Their scales shifted color like oil on water, and membrane wings folded against serpentine bodies. There were 6 of them, all watching Marcus with obvious intelligence. When the largest stepped forward, Marcus could see scarring along its neck and flanks, battle damage from some ancient conflict. The dragon opened its mouth, revealing rows of crystalline teeth. Marcus tensed, ready to run or fight or both. Instead, the creature made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical, almost questioning. Marcus realized he was holding his breath. These weren't monsters. They were afraid. The way they held themselves, the defensive positioning around what looked like smaller dragons hidden behind the larger ones. They had families here. Young ones to protect. I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. He slowly raised his hands, palms open. Universal gesture of peace, he hoped. The lead dragon tilted its head, studying him. Its nostrils flared, tasting his scent. Then it did something that made Marcus question his sanity. It backed away slightly and lowered its head. Not submission, but acknowledgement. Recognition of intelligence meeting. Intelligence. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. These creatures had been alone on this dead ship for who knew how long. Waiting. Surviving. Maybe they understood abandonment better than anyone. He took a careful step forward. The dragon didn't retreat. Instead, it made that wind chime sound again, and the others began to emerge more fully from the shadows. Marcus could see younglings now, barely the size of large dogs, their scales bright and unmarked by time. "Okay," Marcus said, more to himself than to them. "I guess we're all stuck here together." The dragon seemed to understand something in his tone. It moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and starlight. When it was close enough to touch, the creature extended its neck and gently pressed its forehead against Marcus's helmet. Contact. Images flashed through Marcus's mind. Not words, but concepts. Loneliness. Loss. A great war among the stars. Ships fleeing a dying sun, and underneath it all, hope. Stubborn, irrational hope that someday someone would come. Someone had. A human mechanic with calloused hands and a talent for fixing broken things. Marcus pulled back, gasping. The dragon's eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before. Ancient wisdom mixed with something almost playful. It stepped back and gestured with one wing toward the depths of the cargo bay. An invitation. Marcus looked around at the impossible ship, at the creatures who had somehow survived its emptiness, at the vast darkness beyond the hull that held no rescue. Then he shouldered his toolkit and followed the dragon deeper into the maze of containers. He was still stranded. Still alone. But maybe alone didn't have to mean lonely. And maybe, just maybe, being left behind was exactly where he was supposed to be. The dragons led Marcus through a labyrinth of passages that seemed to exist in defiance of physics. Corridors branched and twisted, sometimes opening into chambers so vast that his helmet lights couldn't find the walls. The dragons moved with confidence, navigating by senses Marcus couldn't understand. They had names for each other, he realized. Not words exactly, but harmonic frequencies that carried meaning. The large scarred dragon was called something like thunder in the deep. A smaller one with blue-green scales answered to what might have been starlight dancing. The younglings chirped responses to sounds that registered as barely audible whispers to Marcus's ears. Communication came in fragments. When one of the dragons touched him, images would flow between them. Not telepathy exactly, but something close. Shared memory. Emotional resonance. Marcus was starting to understand that these creatures experienced reality in layers that human senses couldn't fully grasp. They were taking him somewhere important. He could feel their anticipation building. The passage opened into a chamber that made Marcus stop walking entirely. It was a workshop. Not human, but recognizably a place where things were built and repaired. Workbenches formed from the same twisted metal as the ship's structure lined the walls. Tools hung in organized arrays, their purposes mysterious but their craftsmanship obvious. But what caught Marcus's attention was the centerpiece of the room. A massive crystalline structure rose from the floor like a technological tree. Energy conduits snaked around its trunk, pulsing with faint light. At its base, control surfaces showed holographic displays in languages that hurt to read. Thunder in the Deep approached the crystal tree and placed one scaled hand against its surface. The light immediately grew brighter and the displays shifted to new configurations. The dragon turned to Marcus and projected a simple concept. Broken. Marcus set down his toolkit and circled the device, his engineer's mind already working. He'd seen enough alien technology in his career to recognize certain universal principles. Energy flow. Feedback loops. System redundancy. Whatever this thing was, it was the heart of something larger. He pulled out his scanner and ran a diagnostic. The readings were unlike anything in Terran databases, but patterns emerged. Power fluctuations. Incomplete circuits. A cascade failure that had been building for centuries. "This is why the ship's dying," Marcus said aloud. Thunder in the Deep tilted his head, and Marcus projected the concept as clearly as he could. System failure. Slow death. The dragon's response hit him like a physical blow. Guilt. Responsibility. They had been trying to fix it for generations, using knowledge passed down from their ancestors, but the ship was beyond their understanding now. Too much had been lost. Too much forgotten. Marcus knelt beside his toolkit, considering. His specialization was human technology, but engineering principles were universal. Energy wanted to flow. Systems wanted to work. Sometimes they just needed someone stubborn enough to make them remember how. He selected a quantum resonance detector and began mapping the crystal's internal structure. The readings painted a three-dimensional maze of fractures and dead pathways. The device wasn't just broken. It was wounded, like a living thing that had been injured and never properly healed. Starlight Dancing approached while he worked. She was smaller than thunder in the deep, her scales shifting through shades of blue and silver. When she touched Marcus's shoulder, her thoughts carried a different flavor. Curiosity mixed with something that might have been admiration. The images she shared showed him the ship in its prime. Vast chambers filled with light and life, creatures like herself soaring through corridors that opened to accommodate their flight. Gardens that grew in impossible spirals reaching toward artificial suns. A civilization that had learned to make their homes among the stars. Then came the darkness. Not just the absence of light, but something hungry and spreading, a force that consumed worlds and left only emptiness behind. The great evacuation as entire species fled before it. Ships scattered across the galaxy, carrying refugees to any safe harbor they could find. But this ship had been damaged in the exodus. The navigation systems failed, stranding them in deep space. The life support began to fail slowly, forcing them into hibernation chambers to wait for rescue that never came. Only the dragons had remained awake. Their physiology allowed them to survive in the ship's failing environment, but at a cost. Generations born and died in the artificial twilight, their numbers dwindling as the ship's systems continued to decay. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes, not caring that the dragons could sense his emotions. He understood now why they had survived. They weren't just passengers on this ship. They were its guardians, its caretakers. They had stayed awake through the long night to tend to something precious, even as it slowly died around them. "I can fix this," he said, and the confidence in his voice surprised him. The dragons went very still, hope and disbelief warring in their shared emotional field. Marcus stood and began pulling equipment from his toolkit. Plasma cutters, molecular welders, quantum field generators, human technology designed to interface with alien systems. The Terran Colonial Authority had learned long ago that the universe was full of broken things, waiting for the right engineer to come along. But this would require more than just human technology. Marcus looked at Thunder in the Deep and projected a concept. Partnership. The dragon's response was immediate and overwhelming. Yes, absolutely yes. What followed was unlike any engineering project Marcus had ever undertaken. The dragons possessed knowledge their ancestors had encoded in genetic memory. Songs that described the ship's architecture, dances that mapped energy flows, stories that contained technical specifications wrapped in metaphor and myth. Marcus provided the tools and techniques to bridge the gap between what the ship was and what it needed to become. Human engineering was adaptable, designed to work with incomplete information and jury-rigged solutions. Perfect for a repair job that required rebuilding alien technology with improvised parts. Thunder in the Deep could interface directly with the ship's systems, his touch activating pathways that had been dormant for centuries. Starlight Dancing possessed an intuitive understanding of the energy flows, able to guide Marcus's work with precision that saved hours of trial and error. The younglings helped too, their smaller size allowing them to access spaces that the adults couldn't reach. They carried tools and held components while Marcus worked, their chirping communications coordinating the repair effort. Hours passed unnoticed. The crystal tree began to pulse with renewed life as Marcus and his unlikely team worked their way through its damaged systems. Each repair brought new challenges, but also new understanding. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was an ecosystem, a living synthesis of technology and biology that had sustained an entire civilization. When the first major system came online, the change was immediate. Gravity stabilized throughout the section. The air began to circulate properly. Emergency lighting was replaced by a warm glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The dragons responded to the change with a harmony that made Marcus's bones vibrate. Joy. Pure, unfiltered joy at seeing their home come back to life. But Marcus knew this was just the beginning. The ship was enormous, and decades of cascade failures had damaged systems throughout its structure. This one repair had bought them time, but there was so much more work to do. He looked at his new companions, these alien creatures who had trusted him with their most precious hope. They looked back with eyes that held starlight and determination. "All right," Marcus said, hefting his plasma cutter. "Let's wake up this ship." The dragons were adapting to human problem-solving methods with startling speed. Thunder in the Deep had figured out how to read Marcus's scanner displays, his ancient eyes tracking energy patterns across the holographic readouts. Starlight Dancing had learned to anticipate which tools Marcus would need next, her understanding of human engineering principles growing with each repair, but it was the younglings who surprised him most. Marcus was deep in the ship's power distribution center, trying to reroute energy around a section of damaged conduits, when one of the smaller dragons approached. This one's scales were pale gold with streaks of copper, and she couldn't be more than a few years old by human standards. The dragons called her something like dawn breaking on metal. She chirped softly and pressed her snout against Marcus's hand. The contact sent images flooding through his mind, but these weren't the careful, deliberate communications he'd grown used to with the adults. These were rapid-fire concepts, ideas tumbling over each other with youthful enthusiasm. She had been watching him work and noticed something the adults had missed. The power distribution network wasn't just damaged. It had been modified. Someone had deliberately rerouted the energy flows, creating a bottleneck that was slowly choking the ship's systems. Marcus pulled up the schematics on his scanner and cross-referenced them with Dawn Breaking's observations. She was right. Hidden beneath centuries of wear and patch jobs, the original modifications were still visible. Someone had sabotaged the ship's power grid. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just system failure from age and neglect. Someone had deliberately crippled the ship's ability to support life. The question was why. Marcus shared his discovery with Thunder in the Deep, watching the ancient dragon's emotional field shift through confusion, anger, and finally a deep sadness that spoke of old wounds reopened. The images Thunder in the Deep shared in return painted a darker picture of the ship's final days. Not everyone had wanted to flee the darkness that consumed their worlds. Some had believed they could fight it, that running was cowardice. Others had thought the evacuation ships would attract the hungry dark, leading it to new feeding grounds. Sabotage had been the compromise position. Disable the refugee ships without destroying them outright. Force them to choose between returning to fight or dying slowly in the void. It was a decision born of desperation and fear, and it had doomed thousands of innocent beings to a slow death among the stars. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, but he forced it down. Anger wouldn't fix the ship or save the dragons. Only work would do that. Show me everything, he said to Thunder in the Deep. Every system they touched, every modification they made, we're going to undo all of it. What followed was the most complex engineering challenge of Marcus's career. The saboteurs had been thorough and clever, disguising their modifications as maintenance upgrades and emergency repairs. Unraveling their work required not just technical skill but archaeological precision, separating legitimate repairs from deliberate damage. The dragons proved invaluable partners in this effort. Their genetic memories contained detailed knowledge of the ship's original configuration, passed down through generations of caretakers. They could identify which modifications belonged and which had been imposed by desperate saboteurs. Starlight Dancing possessed an almost supernatural ability to trace energy flows through the ship's systems. She would dance through the corridors, her movements following invisible pathways that Marcus could only detect with his instruments. When she stopped and pressed her hand against a wall, he invariably found hidden conduits and rerouted connections. The younglings served as his extended senses, their smaller size and natural agility allowing them to explore spaces that would be impossible for humans to reach. Dawnbreaking had a particular talent for finding discrepancies, her young mind unclouded by preconceptions about how things should work. As they worked their way through the ship, Marcus began to understand the true scope of what they were attempting to restore. This wasn't just a starship, it was a mobile world. Entire ecosystems had been designed to sustain themselves within its hull. Gardens that could feed thousands, water reclamation systems that could process the waste of an entire city, manufacturing centers capable of producing everything from food to starship components. The ship was designed for a journey that might last generations. A ark carrying an entire civilization to safety among the stars. But the sabotage had crippled more than just the life support systems. Navigation was compromised. The hyperdrive had been deliberately destabilized. Even if they could restore full power, the ship might not be able to reach a safe harbor. Marcus shared these concerns with his dragon companions during one of their rest periods. They had gathered in what might once have been a communal dining area, its walls decorated with murals that seemed to shift and change in the artificial twilight. Thunder in the Deep's response was not what Marcus expected. Instead of despair or resignation, the ancient dragon projected determination mixed with something that might have been amusement. The images he shared showed Marcus that the dragons had never expected to leave this ship. Their ancestors had made a different choice than the other refugees. Instead of seeking a new world to colonize, they had chosen to make this ship their world. They had been succeeding too until the systems began to fail. The ship had supported their community for generations, its vast spaces becoming home to creatures who had learned to fly through metal corridors and raise their young among technological wonders. The sabotage hadn't just stolen their chance at reaching safety. It had slowly murdered their home, but now there was hope. Marcus's arrival hadn't just brought technical skills they needed. It had brought a new perspective. Human engineering wasn't bound by the original designer's assumptions. Where the ship's creators had seen systems that must work in predetermined ways, Marcus saw opportunities for innovation. "We're not going to restore the ship," Marcus said, sudden understanding flooding through him. "We're going to improve it." The dragon's harmonized response nearly knocked him off his feet. Joy and excitement and anticipation all rolled into a sound that made the metal walls ring like bells. That night, as Marcus slept in the nest the dragons had prepared for him among the cargo containers, he dreamed of impossible things. Corridors that opened like flowers to accommodate dragonflight, gardens that grew in spirals through the ship's superstructure, energy systems that fed on starlight and the songs of their caretakers. When he woke, Dawnbreaking was curled up against his side, her warm scales providing comfort against the ship's chill. She stirred when he moved, blinking golden eyes that held trust so complete it made his chest tight. Marcus had been abandoned on this ship by accident, but looking at the young dragon's sleeping face, he realized that maybe some accidents were actually destiny wearing a disguise. He had a ship to rebuild, a home to restore, and unlikely friends who had been waiting far too long for someone who understood that broken things could become better than new. The work continued, but now it felt less like repair and more like creation. They weren't just fixing what had been damaged. They were building something entirely new, something that honored the ship's original purpose while transcending its limitations, something that could be home to both ancient dragons and stubborn human mechanics who refused to accept that anything was beyond fixing. He was working in what the dragons called the memory chamber, a vast spherical room where crystalline structures stored the accumulated knowledge of their civilization. The crystals responded to dragon touch, projecting holographic records of history, science, and culture that stretched back millennia. Marcus had been trying to access technical specifications for the ship's original navigation systems when Dawnbreaking chirped excitedly and pointed to a cluster of crystals that glowed brighter than the others when Thunder in the Deep touched the indicated crystals. The chamber filled with images that made Marcus's breath catch. Star charts, not just maps of where the ship had been, but projections of where other refugee vessels had fled, hundreds of them, scattered across the galaxy like seeds on the cosmic wind. The dragon's ancestors hadn't just been passengers on one evacuation ship. They had been part of a vast exodus, a coordinated effort to preserve their civilization by spreading it across the stars. Each ship carried a piece of the whole: genetic samples, cultural artifacts, technological knowledge, and most importantly, the means to contact and eventually reunite with the others. "You're not the only survivors," Marcus whispered, the implications hitting him like a thunderclap. Thunder in the Deep's emotional response was complex, layered with centuries of hope and despair. They had known about the other ships, had spent generations trying to repair their communications array to reach out across the void. But the sabotage had been too thorough. They could receive signals but not send them. They had been listening to their scattered people for centuries, unable to respond, watching other communities flourish while their own slowly died. Marcus felt something ignite in his chest. This wasn't just about fixing one ship anymore. This was about reconnecting a shattered civilization. "Show me the communications array," he said. The journey to the ship's communication center took them through sections Marcus hadn't seen before. Here the architecture was even more alien, with passages that spiraled through dimensions that shouldn't exist. The dragons navigated by senses that had evolved to perceive space in ways human minds struggled to comprehend. The communications array occupied an entire deck near the ship's bow. It was a marvel of engineering that combined organic growth patterns with crystalline technology. Antenna structures branched like metallic trees, their surfaces covered in receivers that could detect signals across multiple dimensional layers. But Marcus could see immediately why it wasn't working. The saboteurs had been particularly vicious here. Not content with simple disabling, they had introduced corrupted code into the system's core, a viral program that actively fought against any attempt at repair. They really didn't want you calling for help, Marcus muttered, running diagnostic scans on the infected systems. The virus was sophisticated, designed to mimic legitimate system functions while gradually degrading performance. Worse, it was adaptive, evolving new attack patterns whenever the dragons attempted repairs. But Marcus had advantages the saboteurs hadn't anticipated. Human computer science had developed along different lines than the ship's original designers. Where their systems emphasized harmony and cooperation, human technology had evolved in an environment of constant conflict. Every human computer system was hardened against attack by default. Marcus began constructing what amounted to an immune system for the ship's computers. He used techniques borrowed from human cybersecurity, creating hunter-killer programs that could identify and eliminate the viral code without damaging legitimate functions. The work was delicate and dangerous. One mistake could crash the entire communication network, potentially destroying irreplaceable historical records stored in the system's memory banks. But the dragons trusted him, and their faith gave him the confidence to take risks that a more cautious engineer might avoid. Starlight dancing proved invaluable during this phase. Her ability to perceive energy flows extended to information patterns, allowing her to guide Marcus's programs through the system's most vulnerable areas. She could sense where the virus had taken hold and where healthy code still functioned. The younglings helped by monitoring backup systems, ready to isolate damaged sections if Marcus's repairs went wrong. Dawnbreaking had become particularly skilled at reading human technical displays, her young mind adapting to hybrid thinking that combined dragon intuition with human logic. The breakthrough came during Marcus's third attempt to purge the main communication processor. He had been working for 16 straight hours, surviving on stimulants and stubborn determination, when suddenly the viral signatures began disappearing from his scanners. The antiviral programs were working. More than working. They were learning from each encounter, becoming more effective with every iteration. Within hours, they had cleansed the entire communication array of saboteur code. The moment when the array came fully online was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The chamber filled with signals from across the galaxy as the receivers began processing decades of backlogged transmissions. Voices of the scattered dragon communities speaking in harmonies that made the ship's hull ring like a vast musical instrument. Thunder in the deep touched the primary transmitter with trembling claws. For the first time in centuries, their response signal reached across the void to touch minds light years away. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus felt echoes of joy and disbelief, washing back through the communication link as distant communities realized that the lost ship had finally found its voice. Again, but the reunion celebration was interrupted by something that made Marcus's blood run cold. Among the incoming signals was a transmission from the Terran Colonial Authority. Official, urgent, and definitely meant for him. The Prometheus had returned to search for him, but they hadn't come alone. The discovery of the dragon ship had triggered every first contact protocol in the Terran bureaucracy. A full diplomatic and scientific expedition was en route, complete with military escort and corporate representatives eager to claim salvage rights. Marcus felt the dragon's emotional field shift as he shared this information. Fear mixed with determination. They had been alone for so long that the prospect of contact with other intelligent species was both thrilling and terrifying. But there was more in the transmission that made Marcus's hands shake as he read. The Terran expedition included xenobiologists who specialized in studying primitive alien species, corporate lawyers who specialized in establishing resource extraction rights on abandoned vessels, military advisors whose job was ensuring that first contact proceeded according to Terran interests. The humans were coming to study the dragons like specimens and claim their ship as salvage. Thunder in the deep. Ad's response was surprisingly calm. The ancient dragon had lived through the destruction of his original civilization. He understood what it meant when technologically superior species arrived with lawyers and soldiers. But Marcus was not calm. These dragons had trusted him with their most precious secrets. They had welcomed him as family when he was stranded and alone. They had shared their knowledge and their hope without reservation. He would not let them be treated as curiosities in a human museum. "How long until your people arrive?" Thunder in the Deep asked through their shared mental link. Marcus checked the transmission timestamp against stellar navigation data. 3 days. Maybe 4 if we're lucky. "Then we have work to do," the dragon replied, and Marcus caught images of plans that were both audacious and completely insane. The dragons weren't planning to hide from the human expedition. They were planning to greet them as equals. But that would require finishing the ship's restoration and establishing contact with the other dragon communities. They needed to prove that this wasn't a derelict vessel with a few primitive survivors. This was the flagship of a living civilization that had learned to thrive among the stars, and they had 3 days to make it happen. Marcus looked around at his unlikely family of alien engineers and felt a grin spreading across his face. He'd always worked best under pressure. "All right," he said, reaching for his toolkit. "Let's show them what dragons and humans can build together." The dragons worked with an intensity that bordered on miraculous. Centuries of careful patience gave way to focused urgency as they coordinated repairs across the ship's massive structure. What had been a slow, methodical restoration became something closer to controlled chaos. Thunder in the Deep coordinated the effort with a precision that would have impressed any human military commander. He divided the dragon community into specialized teams, each focusing on critical systems that needed to be operational before the human expedition arrived. Starlight Dancing led a team of adult dragons in restoring the ship's external sensors and defensive systems. Not weapons exactly, but shields and deflector arrays that would demonstrate technological sophistication. The dragons had no intention of fighting the humans, but they wanted to make it clear that this meeting would happen between equals. The younglings, led by Dawnbreaking, took on the task of restoring the ship's internal environmental controls. Their small size and natural agility allowed them to reach damaged systems in the ship's deepest recesses. They worked with infectious enthusiasm, treating the restoration like an elaborate game. Marcus found himself at the center of everything, his human engineering knowledge essential for integrating systems that hadn't been designed to work together. The dragon's repairs relied heavily on biological components, living systems that could adapt and heal themselves. Marcus provided the technological bridges needed to connect organic systems with mechanical ones. The fusion of approaches created solutions that neither species could have achieved alone. Control networks that combined dragon intuition with human logic, power distribution systems that could heal themselves when damaged, navigation arrays that used both stellar positioning and the dragon's inherited sense of direction through space. On the second day, they achieved something that shouldn't have been possible. The ship's main engines came online for the first time in centuries. The moment when power flowed through the massive drive assemblies was felt throughout the ship. Gravity shifted slightly as the artificial singularities that powered the engines began their ancient dance. The ship's hull rang with harmonics as structural stress redistributed itself. Marcus felt the change through his boots, a subtle vibration that spoke of barely contained energies waiting to push them toward the stars. The dragons responded with a harmony that made his bones ache, their joy so intense it was almost painful. But there was no time to celebrate. The Terran expedition was less than a day away, and they still had critical work to complete. The most important task was establishing full communication with the scattered dragon communities. Individual ships had been responding to their signals, but coordinating a civilization-wide response required reactivating the ship's primary communication nexus. This proved to be their greatest challenge. The nexus was located at the ship's exact center, in a chamber that existed in folded space. Reaching it required navigating passages that twisted through dimensions human minds weren't equipped to perceive. Marcus had to trust completely in his dragon guides as they led him through corridors that seemed to turn inside out when he wasn't looking directly at them. His instruments went haywire in the folded space, their readings becoming increasingly meaningless as conventional physics broke down. The Nexus chamber itself defied description. It was simultaneously vast and intimate, ancient and timeless. Crystalline structures grew from surfaces that might have been walls or floor or ceiling, their faceted surfaces reflecting light that came from everywhere and nowhere. At the chamber's heart was a construct that Marcus initially mistook for a living creature. It moved with organic fluidity, its surface shifting between states of matter that shouldn't coexist. Only when Thunder in the Deep approached and placed his claws against its surface did Marcus realize he was looking at technology so advanced it had transcended the boundary between artificial and natural. The Nexus responded to the dragon's touch by projecting a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Points of light marked the locations of dragon communities, their signals creating a web of communication that spanned thousands of light years. But many of the lights were dim or flickering. Some communities had thrived, establishing themselves on new worlds and building prosperous civilizations. Others had struggled with the same isolation and system failures that had nearly claimed this ship. A few lights had gone dark entirely, marking communities that hadn't survived the long exile. Marcus felt a weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one ship anymore. The techniques they had developed for restoration could be shared with other communities, helping them overcome the sabotage that had crippled their vessels. "We can save them all," he whispered, and felt Thunder in the Deep's agreement wash through the mental link. But first, they had to survive the next few hours. The Terran expedition dropped out of hyperspace exactly when Marcus's calculations had predicted. 3 ships, the diplomatic vessel Harmony, the research ship Curiosity, and the military escort Vigilance. Professional, efficient, and completely unprepared for what they were about to encounter. Marcus monitored their communications from the restored command center, listening to the increasing confusion in their voices as their sensors detected the dragon ship's active systems. Prometheus Control, we're reading massive energy signatures from the Derelict. Previous reports indicated minimal power. Confirmed, Harmony. We're seeing active shields, communication arrays, and what appears to be a charging hyperdrive. The vessel is definitely not abandoned. Vigilance here. Weapons arrays are powering up just as a precaution. Marcus felt the dragons tense around him. They could sense the humans' fear and suspicion through the ship's sensors. Centuries of hiding had taught them to recognize the signs of aggressive intent. "It's time," Thunder in the Deep said through their link. Marcus activated the communication array and opened a channel to the Terran expedition. His hands shook slightly as he composed the message that would determine how this first contact proceeded. "Terran vessels, this is Marcus Chen aboard the dragon ship Haven's Rest. I am alive and well, and I am speaking as an official representative of the Drakmari Confederacy. This vessel is not abandoned, and the beings aboard are not primitives in need of study. They are a spacefaring civilization with technology that predates human space travel by millennia." The silence that followed stretched for nearly a full minute. Marcus could imagine the chaos aboard the human ships as his message overturned every assumption they had made about this mission. Finally, a response came from the Harmony. "Marcus Chen, this is Captain Sarah Martinez. We're relieved to hear you're alive, but we need clarification on your status." "Are you speaking under duress?" Marcus smiled, glancing around at the dragons who were monitoring the conversation with obvious interest. "Negative, Captain. I am speaking as a free agent and a friend of the Drakmari people. I'm also speaking as someone who has spent the last 3 weeks learning that humans have a lot to learn about cooperation." Before the captain could respond, Thunder in the Deep activated the ship's external displays. The hull became transparent to visual wavelengths, revealing the vast chambers within where dragons soared through technological gardens that glowed with bioluminescent light. The effect on the human expedition was immediate and profound. Marcus could hear gasps and exclamations across all 3 ships as they got their first real look at a functioning alien civilization. "My God," someone whispered over an open channel. "It's beautiful." Marcus felt a surge of pride both for his new family and for his species. Humans could be aggressive and short-sighted, but they could also recognize wonder when they saw it. "Captain Martinez," Marcus continued, "I'd like to request permission to come aboard the Harmony. I have a proposal that I think will interest your superiors back on Earth. The Drakmari Confederacy is looking for allies, and I believe humanity might be exactly what they need." The pause was shorter this time. "Permission granted, Mr. Chen. but I hope you understand that this situation is far more complex than anything our protocols anticipated." Marcus laughed, feeling the dragon's amusement echo his own. "Captain, if I've learned anything these past few weeks, it's that the most complex situations often have the simplest solutions. Sometimes you just need to trust people who know how to fix things." As he prepared to board the shuttle that would take him to the human ships, Marcus felt a hand rest gently on his shoulder. Dawnbreaking looked up at him with golden eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. The images she projected weren't words or concepts, but pure emotion, gratitude, trust, love. Marcus knelt and pressed his forehead against hers, sharing one last moment of connection before stepping back into the human world. But he wasn't leaving the dragons behind. He was bringing both species together, and he had a feeling that the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Captain Martinez had assembled her senior staff in the ship's main conference room, their faces reflecting the mixture of wonder and bewilderment that had characterized the expedition since Marcus's transmission. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the mission's lead xenobiologist, couldn't stop staring at the holographic displays showing the dragon ship's interior. Commander Jake Reynolds from the Vigilance kept one hand near his sidearm. Despite the peaceful nature of the encounter, Marcus entered the room still wearing his maintenance coveralls, his appearance drawing surprised looks from the immaculately uniformed officers. 3 weeks aboard an alien vessel had left him looking more like a deep space prospector than a first-contact diplomat. "Mr. Chen," Captain Martinez began formally, "before we proceed, I need to verify your mental state and confirm that you're speaking freely." Marcus submitted to a brief medical scan without protest. Dr. Vasquez pronounced him physically healthy if somewhat undernourished. The psychological evaluation took longer, but eventually confirmed what Marcus already knew. He was thinking more clearly than he had in years. "Now then," the captain continued, "perhaps you can explain how a stranded maintenance worker became the spokesperson for an alien civilization." Marcus smiled, settling into his chair with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to navigate impossible situations. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you stop thinking about what species someone belongs to and start thinking about what they need fixed." He activated his personal datapad and projected technical schematics that made the assembled officers lean forward in amazement. "The Drakmari ship isn't just advanced technology. It's a completely different approach to engineering. Where we build machines, they grow them. Where we program computers, they teach them. Where we design systems to be efficient, they design them to be alive." Dr. Vasquez interrupted, her voice thick with excitement. "These biosynthetic matrices are decades ahead of our current research. The integration of organic and artificial systems is seamless. How did they achieve this level of technological sophistication?" "Practice," Marcus replied simply. "They've been spacefaring for longer than our species has had written language. But here's the interesting part. They're not the only ones." He shared the star charts the dragons had shown him, mapping the locations of dozens of refugee communities scattered across the galaxy. The Drakmari Confederacy isn't one ship or even one planet. It's a galactic civilization that has survived by adapting to every environment they've encountered. Commander Reynolds spoke up, his military training evident in his direct questions. "What are their defensive capabilities? Do they pose a threat to human space?" Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Commander, they've been watching our expansion for decades. If they wanted to stop us, do you really think we would have made it this far?" The implications of that statement settled over the room like a physical weight. Humanity had been exploring the galaxy under the assumption that they were among the first spacefaring species to achieve interstellar travel. The existence of an established galactic civilization changed everything. "What do they want from us?" Captain Martinez asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering how to explain concepts that had taken him weeks to understand. Partnership. The Drakmari have something humans need: knowledge, technology, and perspective that comes from millions of years of experience. But humans have something they need too: adaptability. He pulled up another set of schematics, these showing the hybrid systems he had helped design during the ship's restoration. Drakmari technology is incredibly sophisticated, but it's also specialized. Their systems are designed to work perfectly within established parameters. Human technology is designed to work adequately under impossible conditions. Dr. Vasquez was already making connections. Hybrid vigor, combining two different approaches to achieve results that neither could accomplish alone. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. The repairs we've accomplished in the last 3 weeks would have taken the dragons decades to complete on their own. But they also required Drakmari biotechnology that human science won't achieve for centuries. Captain Martinez looked thoughtful. What kind of partnership are we talking about? Trade agreements? Technology exchange? Cultural cooperation? Marcus grinned, and for a moment the assembled officers could see echoes of the dragon's infectious enthusiasm in his expression. How about all of the above plus things we haven't even thought of yet? He activated a new display showing communication logs from across the galaxy. Since we restored the ship's communication array, I've been in contact with Drakmari communities on 47 different worlds. They're all facing similar challenges: aging infrastructure, isolated communities, and the need for fresh perspectives on old problems. And you're proposing that humanity provides those fresh perspectives? Commander Reynolds asked skeptically. I'm proposing that we learn from each other, Marcus replied. The Drakmari have survived as a civilization by being adaptable. They've thrived by being cooperative. They've achieved things we can barely imagine by thinking in terms of generations instead of quarterly profits. The room fell silent as the officers contemplated the magnitude of what Marcus was describing. First contact with an alien species was challenging enough. First contact with an entire galactic civilization was unprecedented. Captain Martinez finally broke the silence. Mr. Chen, what you're describing sounds wonderful in theory. But practically speaking, how do we even begin such a partnership? Our governments would need years to develop appropriate protocols. Marcus stood and walked to the room's main viewport, gazing out at the dragon ship that hung gracefully in space nearby. Its hull shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. We begin with trust, he said quietly. 3 weeks ago, I was just another human mechanic who thought he knew how the universe worked. The dragons could have let me die in that cargo bay. Instead, they welcomed me as family. They shared their knowledge, their hopes, and their fears without reservation. He turned back to face the assembled officers. They trusted me because I was willing to work alongside them instead of studying them. They respected me because I treated them as equals instead of subjects, and they accepted me because I was willing to learn instead of assuming I already knew everything. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward intently. What are you suggesting? Marcus smiled, and in that expression the officers could see the confidence of someone who had learned to think beyond the boundaries of his own species. I'm suggesting that we stop talking and start working. The Drakmari have communities throughout human space. They've been here all along, hidden in places we thought were empty. Some of them need help. Some of them have knowledge that could solve problems we didn't even know we had. He gestured toward the dragon ship. That vessel out there is more than just advanced technology. It's a demonstration that cooperation can achieve impossible things. The dragons and I didn't just repair their ship. We made it better than it was before. Captain Martinez stood as well, her decision crystallizing. What do you need from us? Time, Marcus replied immediately. The Drakmari communities are already talking to each other for the first time in centuries. They're sharing solutions to problems that have isolated them for generations. But they need human partners who understand both species well enough to facilitate cooperation. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I'm requesting permission to establish a permanent liaison position. Someone who can work with both human and Drakmari communities to identify opportunities for mutual benefit. Commander Reynolds frowned. You're talking about abandoning your human citizenship. Marcus shook his head. I'm talking about expanding it. The dragons taught me that citizenship isn't about species or nationality. It's about responsibility to the community you're part of, and my community just got a lot bigger. Dr. Vasquez was already taking notes, her scientific mind racing through the possibilities. The research opportunities alone would be revolutionary. Biotechnology, energy systems, space navigation, social organization. And that's just the beginning, Marcus agreed. But it all starts with trust. The Drakmari are willing to share everything they know, but only with partners who approach them as equals. Captain Martinez nodded slowly. I'll need to contact Earth immediately. This decision is far above my authority level. Marcus smiled, feeling the dragon's presence through the mental link they had taught him to maintain across space. Take all the time you need, Captain. The Drakmari have been patient for centuries. They can wait a little longer for humanity to catch up. He moved toward the door, then paused. But while you're waiting for orders from Earth, might I suggest a small demonstration? The dragons would be honored to host a cultural exchange. Nothing formal, just a chance for your people to see what cooperation looks like when species stop being afraid of each other. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. Marcus could see the wonder fighting with caution in the officers' faces, the same battle between fear and hope that had defined first contact throughout human history. Finally, Captain Martinez smiled. "Mr. Chen, I think that's the best idea anyone's had since we arrived." 6 months later, Marcus Chen stood in the newly constructed Cultural Exchange Center aboard Haven's Rest, watching a scene that would have been impossible to imagine when he was first stranded among the dragons. Human engineers worked alongside Drakmari biotechnicians, their collaborative efforts producing hybrid technologies that neither species could have achieved alone. Children from both species played together in the ship's living gardens, their laughter creating harmonies that resonated through the vessel's organic hull. Scholars shared knowledge that spanned millions of years of combined civilization, each discovery opening new possibilities for cooperation. The Exchange Center had been Thunder in the Deep's idea, a space designed specifically for interspecies collaboration. Its architecture defied conventional physics, with rooms that could reshape themselves to accommodate both human rectangular thinking and Drakmari spiral logic. The walls themselves were alive, responding to the emotional states of their occupants with shifting colors and patterns. Marcus made his way through the center, greeting friends and colleagues from both species. His role as cultural liaison had evolved far beyond what anyone had originally envisioned. He was part diplomat, part engineer, part teacher, and part student, helping to bridge the gap between fundamentally different ways of understanding the universe. The success of the program had exceeded everyone's expectations. Within weeks of the first cultural exchange, human and Drakmari communities throughout the galaxy had begun reaching out to each other. Trade relationships developed naturally, with humans providing adaptable technology and creative problem-solving while the Drakmari shared advanced scientific knowledge and sustainable living practices. More importantly, the philosophical exchange was transforming both species. Humans were learning to think in terms of generations instead of quarters, considering the long-term consequences of their actions. The Drakmari were discovering the value of rapid adaptation and creative improvisation, abilities that had helped them overcome challenges that might otherwise have taken centuries to resolve. Dawn Breaking appeared at Marcus's side, now grown into a magnificent adult dragon whose scales shimmered with patterns that spoke of joy and accomplishment. She had become something of a celebrity among both species, her natural ability to think in hybrid human Drakmari concepts making her invaluable as a translator and teacher. "The council meeting is beginning," she communicated through their shared mental link, her thoughts carrying undertones of excitement and anticipation. Marcus followed her to the council chamber, where representatives from 43 different Drakmari communities had gathered for the first Confederacy Assembly in over 1,000 years. The chamber itself was a marvel of hybrid engineering, its crystalline structures grown using Drakmari biotechnology but organized according to human principles of democratic representation. Thunder in the Deep presided over the assembly with the dignity that came from centuries of experience. But Marcus could sense the ancient dragon's amazement at what they had accomplished. The scattered, isolated communities that had struggled to survive for so long were now thriving members of a renewed confederation that spanned the galaxy. The agenda for today's session was ambitious. Reports from restoration teams working to repair damaged ships throughout Drakmari space. Updates on joint research projects that were revolutionizing both human and Drakmari technology. Proposals for new collaborative settlements where both species could live and work together. But the most significant item was the formal ratification of the Human Drakmari Cooperative Accord, a document that established the framework for permanent partnership between the two civilizations. Marcus took his place at the podium as the Assembly's official translator, a role that required him to convey not just words but concepts that often had no equivalent between species. The 6 months of constant interaction had taught him to think fluidly between human logic and Drakmari intuition, making him one of the few beings in the galaxy who could truly understand both perspectives. The discussion that followed was passionate but respectful, covering topics that ranged from resource sharing to cultural preservation to joint exploration of the galaxy's unexplored regions. The Drakmari approached each issue with the patience that came from thinking in geological timescales, while human representatives provided the urgency needed to implement solutions within reasonable timeframes. What impressed Marcus most was how naturally the two species had learned to complement each other's strengths. Humans excelled at solving immediate problems and adapting to changing circumstances. Drakmari possessed the wisdom to recognize long-term patterns and the persistence to see projects through to completion across multiple generations. Together, they were achieving things that neither species could have accomplished alone. The vote on the cooperative accord was unanimous. The decision celebrated with a harmony that combined human cheers with the resonant songs of the Drakmari. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he witnessed the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. A true partnership between species based on mutual respect and shared goals. After the assembly concluded, Marcus found himself in the ship's observation deck, gazing out at the stars that no longer seemed distant and cold. Human and Drakmari vessels moved together through space, their mixed crews working toward shared objectives. The galaxy had become a more connected place, filled with possibilities that neither species had imagined when they were struggling alone. Starlight Dancing joined him at the viewport, her presence radiating the contentment that came from work well done. Through their mental link, she shared images of the galaxy as the Drakmari saw it now. Not empty space punctuated by isolated worlds, but a vast network of communities connected by bonds of cooperation and mutual support. "Do you ever regret being left behind?" she asked, her question carrying genuine curiosity. Marcus considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he had been a maintenance worker whose biggest ambition was fixing the next broken machine. Now he was helping to reshape the relationship between civilizations, working on projects that would influence the development of the galaxy for millennia to come. "No," he replied, and felt the truth of it resonate through their shared connection. "Being left behind was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought me home." Thunder in the Deep approached them, his ancient presence carrying satisfaction mixed with anticipation. The old dragon had become something of a mentor to Marcus, teaching him the patience needed to think in terms of generations, while learning from him the value of immediate action when circumstances demanded it. "The final restoration fleet departed this morning," Thunder in the Deep reported. "Within the year, every damaged Drakmari vessel in the galaxy will be fully functional again." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of accomplishment settle in his chest. The sabotage that had nearly destroyed an entire civilization had been completely undone, replaced by improvements that made each ship better than its original design. But more important than the technical achievements was what they represented. Proof that cooperation could overcome any challenge, that understanding could bridge any gap, and that the universe was big enough for species to find strength in their differences rather than division. Dawn Breaking chirped softly, drawing their attention to a new signal appearing on the communication displays. Another ship had been detected at the edge of the system, its design unlike anything in the databases of either species. "First contact protocols?" Marcus asked, falling automatically into his role as cultural liaison. Thunder in the Deep's response carried amusement mixed with confidence. "I think we've learned something about first contact in the last 6 months." Marcus grinned, understanding exactly what the ancient dragon meant. They no longer approached unknown species with fear or suspicion, but with curiosity, and the knowledge that every new encounter was an opportunity for growth. As the three friends headed toward the communication center to make contact with their new visitors, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as a human mechanic stranded among alien dragons. Now he was part of something larger than either species, a community that had learned to build bridges across the vast distances between minds. The galaxy was full of wonders waiting to be discovered. And Marcus Chen, former maintenance worker turned galactic diplomat, was exactly where he belonged. The universe had taught him that sometimes the most important repairs weren't fixing machines, but mending the connections between hearts and minds that allowed different species to become family. And that was a job he would never finish, because there would always be new friends waiting to be found among the stars.